Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of build 25, the Fractal Define R5 workstation. There's something about doing rebuilds and upgrades or building systems that somebody has already started to build. I don't know, I just always find it a lot of fun. And one of the requests that I always have is to redo all of the water block installations, which is obviously completely understandable because the customer really wants me to take a look to make sure that everything has been done properly, because it is one of the most critical installations that you are going to do in your build. If you don't get this right, you're either going to have most commonly overheating or even possibly shorts and damage to the components, the PCBs. And usually when I redo these installations, they're fine, but a common mistake is always made. I mean, I haven't come across a single installation where this mistake hasn't been made, which is using too much thermal paste, which, as most of you will probably know, has no real impact. I mean, you're still going to get the cooling performance, but it just makes a mess. It can end up in places where it can actually cause issues if you use too much of it. And it took me a few hours to clean all of this off. You know, it really got into some difficult places and it took a lot of time and effort to clean it up. Also, a lot of the thermal pads were kind of hanging out where they're in full view, which is something that I try to avoid as much as possible. So I'm redoing all of the water block installations for this build. I'm continuing the case mods, and because I'm going to be mounting the Aquero onto the power supply shroud, I'm going to need to get my hands in through the motherboard tray. And there is obviously a cable routing hole there for all of the power supply cables to come through into the rear section of the case, the cable management area, but it's not actually big enough to get your hands through. Because once the shroud is installed, I'm going to need to plug cables into the power supply, and that's going to have to be done from the back. And same with the Aquero. They need to be threaded in through the motherboard tray and then plugged in from the front side. You'll see what I mean later on, but I definitely have to expand that cable routing hole. And anything I'm going to modify, it's a lot easier to do when it's removed from the case. It's only a few rivets, it's only a couple of minutes to do. And then it needs to be painted also, which obviously means it needs to be separate. You can't just patch these panels, the quality would be terrible. It definitely needs to be completely repainted. As I've mentioned, we've been working on the mods in stages, and I've now completed the second stage of the mods. So the first stage was the front panel mods, allowing for mounting a 360mm radiator properly with good airflow, which the case doesn't really allow for by default, and I also added the 2 fill ports by customer request. Then I realized the 3 ideas that I had for mounting the Aqua 6 XT weren't really going to work to the standard that I wanted. I mean, they would have worked just fine, but they were just lacking a little, in my opinion, in terms of functionality and aesthetics. And it was another excuse to mod further. So I decided to build a power supply shroud for the Aqua 6 XT, but it also improves the build in quite a number of other ways. First of all, structural integrity, which the case was definitely in need of. Also, we are installing a lot of components into a small area, and the build is going to look cramped unless we work very hard for it not to. And one of the ways to prevent it from looking cramped is to add shrouds to cover up some of the complexity. So this is very important in terms of aesthetics and functionality, form and function. Now initially I had a partial shroud, but then I decided to build a full shroud, and I didn't think I was going to be able to because there weren't really enough attachment points, but I figured out a way of doing it in the end. But you can see it wasn't the easiest thing. I had to do quite a bit of prototyping and playing around to get it to fit. All of these cutouts here, there were a lot of things in the way. This is not one of those cases where you can just drop in a power supply shroud like you can with many others. We have 1 attachment point here, a couple of attachment points underneath as well. I was wanting a 4th, but you can see that I had to cut that fold out because the power supply mounts right up against the motherboard tray. There's absolutely no room for this shroud to fit between the power supply and the motherboard tray. So then I've cut this out with a Dremel, which obviously was very rough afterwards, and then I filed it and sanded it until it was absolutely perfect, which it really has to be, because this mod allows for the Aqua 6 XT to be mounted without the faceplate. It actually fits, countersinks into this, which means that the screen will be almost flush with the top of the power supply shroud. So this ends up looking really clean and quite unique. I'm really happy with the way that's going to work out. By the time I got to the end of these mods, I realized I've painted almost everything. There's only a few panels left that have not been painted. So these are the panels that haven't been painted, and actually that front panel has been custom painted because I've modified it. So it's just the bottom panel, the rear panel, the top panel, these, and we don't actually want any white in the build at all. It's not part of the color scheme, so these really should be painted. And then the rear side panel. The windowed side panel has also been painted because, I've done the window mod. Now, the reason this has happened is because originally the customer said only paint what you need to paint. I mean, why paint something that's already painted? It's just kind of a waste of time and budget. And, I can match the finishes. That's not a problem. I mean, these finishes and the colors perfectly match. You're not really going to notice any difference between them. But yeah, because most of them are done, we have decided to paint the rest of them. So now there's a third stage to the mods. So it's basically taken triple the amount of time that it really should have. But take a look at this. Now this is something that you'll see in all of these cases. Basically all of the cheap steel cases, which is most of the cases on the market, they paint them after they assemble them. And this is like a brand new case, and you can see that it's already starting to rust. So particularly in this humid climate, and also where it will be, this is going to rust out in just a matter of months. So I can't leave this, I can't do this amazing high-end paint job on the rest of the panels and have these rusting. So yeah, these definitely needed to be painted. And by the way, I'm not criticizing here. This is something that you see on all of these cases, and this is just what the manufacturers have to do to, meet the budget, to achieve building cases like this at such a low price. So, there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I'm now going to strip these back, sand them back and paint them. And I also have to remove this sound dampening material, which is not an easy task. I've had to do this previously and it is no fun. I've completed the case mods, and I've now also custom painted the entire case.
Because the mods were done in 3 different stages, I've painted at 3 different times, and originally I was trying to match up to the stock factory finish of the case, which was that typical textured kind of matte or satin finish, but more of a textured matte finish. When I found out that I was going to be painting the entire case, even though I only had a few panels left to paint, I decided, and I thought, why don't I do something different to show that this case is custom, to show that it has a custom paint job, so that that stands out just a little bit. And so I decided to go halfway between a matte and a high gloss finish, because obviously high gloss would have just stood out way too much. It almost gives that kind of black hole look where it just sucks in all of the light. And you can get a really beautiful finish with high gloss black and a great look. But yeah, it would have been too much for this, because the ideas for this build, it's a very practical, understated, kind of industrial build, a workstation. And, I don't just do this with a base coat. I use a clear coat over it so that it's extremely durable. And these are 2-pack paints. But yeah, you can see that it's that exact balance between a matte finish and a high gloss finish.
So the case mods are finally complete, and I can now at last begin the assembly, which is not actually going to take very long. The assembly goes very quickly. The only thing that's going to hold me up is the creation and installation of the custom cables, which needs to happen along the way. And I'm really looking forward to starting on the loop for this build, which will happen in the next part of the build log, because this is a very compact build, but with the mods that I've done and working with the case mods, with the loop, to keep things really clean, to keep the ideas for this build is going to be a lot of fun. And with dual loops, it's going to be, very compact, a very tight fit. But thanks for watching, and remember that none of this would be possible without our customers and our patrons.